Good evening and welcome to the Legion Cantina. In today's episode, I'm going to be answering the question, should you buy one of the new starter sets that have just come on for pre-order for Star Wars Legion? So, let's get right into it. The new starter sets have come up for pre-order, and over here in the UK at least, they're pre-ordering for, in some places, £66 down to £62, something like that. I don't know about sort of prices elsewhere in the world. I think in the States they're sort of $70 to $75 maybe, but haven't looked at that in any great detail. But yeah, basically just I'm going to try and answer like, should you, wherever you are in your kind of journey with Legion, whether at the beginning, kind of the middle, or more towards the end, like, are these starter sets for you, and should you be looking to pick one up? So firstly, I'm just going to kind of break down those three categories. I think the first kind of category that these starter sets could potentially be interesting for are the new players. So this might be people who don't have one of their own armies yet. Maybe you've picked up a few bits, some of the older sculpts maybe, and you're kind of looking to actually get your first army going. And I think for you, these are you're kind of the principal target for these starter sets. They do contain everything you're going to need for the game, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But yeah, it's for the new players who really don't have a lot and are just looking to get started with their first army. The next one is players who are already sort of within the game. They maybe have a faction quite sort of heavily collected. Maybe you've got an Empire army, for instance, or something, and you're looking to move into Rebels, Separatist, Republic, something like that. And I think similarly to the new players, these can be a really good way to kind of build the first kind of building blocks of your first army in a new faction. So you might not be completely brand new, but there will still be value here for you kind of picking up one of these starter sets for one of these factions. And then the final one is kind of people who are the more sort of collecting kind of hobby kind of end. So I'd put myself probably in this category. I personally, I'm a bit on the fence about picking up one of the starter sets. I think there would be value. For instance, I might be looking to start maybe a Republic army, which I have a few models for, but this would give me some good value potentially. Or the other side of it is actually a sort of inverted commas cheap way of getting hold of some of the new sculpts. So, if you want to upgrade your Rebel Troopers, or if you want to upgrade your clones or your B1 or whatever, like these new sculpts coming out can do that. Or maybe if you're just looking, you like the painting side of things, maybe. So you're not actually looking to upgrade the sculpts necessarily. You just like the idea of painting up some of those new models and kind of maybe using them along with your old sculpts in an army. So yeah, I think these starter sets, because they are, in Legion terms, such good value, they actually have quite a broad range of potential people who could be looking to pick them up. And I think I definitely, as an experienced player, I'm not writing them off. And I know a lot of people sort of in my kind of local gaming sphere, as it were, who are looking to pick them up. And I think it's just because, in comparison, as I said, to a lot of other Legion stuff, they are pretty cheap. And I don't know how much we'll see people kind of splitting these up and selling off the pieces, because I suspect quite quickly the sort of second-hand market for these will drop quite significantly in price as people pick these up. Maybe if you're buying say an Empire box and you just want the Stormtroopers and Vader, maybe, then that will mean that there are more sort of scout troopers out there on the market. Or again, if you're just looking to bulk up your core and your special forces, you don't want to end up with another Vader sculpt, so maybe that one comes on the market and is quite cheap. So while it is definitely valid to pick up one of these starter sets, I think there may also be some value in kind of waiting and then seeing what pops up on eBay or on Facebook Marketplace or the Facebook groups or whatever, just to see maybe you don't have to buy a whole starter set. You can just benefit from the low prices, meaning there are more available stuff out there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each faction's box individually. I'm going to talk about how much value you're sort of getting. And then for the newer players out there, I'll also run you through like an example list of what you could potentially run with each starter set. So I'll go through them one by one. I think first one we'll go through, I'll start in home territory, start with the Rebels. So a couple of boxes here on the left-hand side. The value is the approximate value I would assign to the things included in the box if they were sold individually. And for the majority of the boxes, these are going to be pretty similar. A couple of them a little bit higher and a little bit lower, just because some of the sculpts that are included are maybe slightly more valuable. or less valuable. And then the power stat is just sort of the quality, like in terms of the competitive standard of the models you're getting. So some of these contain maybe more competitive models than others, for instance. So it's just sort of a rough guide, again, mainly aimed at the newer players, just to give you an idea of what kind of value you're getting and the kind of power that you are getting in each of these boxes. So for Rebels, again, 65 to £70 for the box, and in there you will be getting Luke, who I think you can roughly assign a value to of about £15. The Ahsoka sculpt is out there for sort of 25-ish, and that does contain 2 models. So I think 15 is reasonable here, and again, it will probably drop a little bit lower in the fullness of time. Like, you might start to see Luke's and Vader's and Grievous's out there for maybe closer to £10. But yeah, I think 15 is a pretty reasonable number to assign to Luke. And then the 22 Rebel Troopers, this is just 2 of the sort of standard Rebel Trooper core boxes, and those are currently retailing for about £35. I think, again, in the fullness of time, they'll probably come down to certainly, I think, below 30, maybe down towards like £25 or possibly even slightly cheaper than that. But for now, they're probably worth about £30 to £35. And then you've got the Rebel Commandos, which are your Special Forces option. Again, these are retailing now for about £35. I think, again, these will drop off quite quickly, so I've signed these a value of 30. And again, you'll probably see these come down to about 25 if you were to wait further down the line. And finally, Wookiee Warriors, which again are in the Special Forces slot and occupy sort of the same spot as Rebel Commandos and retail for a very similar amount of money. So yeah, I think, again, reasonable to assign those kind of £30. There is a nice added benefit with the Wookiee Warriors, which is you can also use them in a Republic army. Republic can also use Wookiees, so they might hold their value a little bit better because they do have that bit of versatility where they can be used across 2 factions, which is always a nice thing. Then the final bit is on the right hand side, you get your movement tools, you get your range sticks, you get your attack dice, your defense dice, your score tracker, your basic objectives, and your token sheet for, dodges, aims, all the things you need to play the game. And I think roughly you can assign a kind of value to this of about £40. Maybe that's a little bit on the generous side, but I think given that the sort of essentials kit tends to go for about £20 to £25, I think this is fairly reasonable. And this is one thing that you might start to see come up a fair bit cheaper online, because especially for experienced players who are picking these up, for the sculpts or starting a new faction, they won't tend to need extra copies of these. So it might be that these things come up sort of cheaper secondhand on eBay. So if you are having some doubts about, whether or not you need the starter set and you're wanting to maybe pick up the kind of tools and things like that, might just be worth holding off to see if those come up a bit cheaper. But I think approximately it's not unreasonable to say that the overall box probably has around £180 to £185 worth of stuff in it. Again, if you were to buy this all new. Now, that's not to say that the things in here are worth £185. I don't think that's the case. I think if you were to be a bit savvy on like eBay again, or looking for some discount retailers and things like that, you could probably get this stuff in here for about £150 to maybe £140. But even then, it's still kind of half price. So these starter sets are really good value. And even if you pick these up, realize you don't really like the game and try and sell some bits off, you probably won't lose that much money. Like, even if prices really drop off a cliff, you could probably ship everything in here for some kind of profit if you really wanted to. So I think these starter sets are just a really good way to get into the game, and they are significantly cheaper than almost everything else in the entire game. So if you are looking to get into Legion, I think this is a really good opportunity to take that. But yeah, that's the Rebels one. In terms of their power level, I'll talk about a list now. The Rebel one isn't very good. I'd say it's probably the least competitive of the 4. So this is an example list. So you've got Luke Skywalker, a couple of big units of Rebel Troopers, some Wookiee Warriors, some Rebel Commandos, and a Commando Strike Team, which is basically just like a sniper, essentially, that kind of comes separately to the Rebel Commandos. And what the sort of starter box is built around is a format called Recon, which is a sort of smaller format than the regular army size that you would normally play in Legion. So the normal army size is 1,000 points. The Recon points level is 600, so that bit lower. And essentially each of these armies is made to around the idea that you've got about 600 points worth of value in each of these boxes. Now, for some of them, you have to maybe be a bit more creative with others to actually get to that 600. But in this case, I've kind of gone for like, you've got Luke and the Wookiee warriors who do some like up close damage in melee. They're pretty good in melee. And then you've got some longer range options with the rebel commandos, the troopers, and the commando strike team. So yeah, I think this is not like the most competitive sort of the boxes, but it'll give you a reasonable like grounding in how the rebel army plays, and you'll use your rebel troopers for sure, and you can use Luke, and hopefully Wookiees and commandos get a buff soon and they'll still be quite good. So definitely not a terrible way to start an army, just maybe not quite as competitive as some of the other ones. Moving across to Empire, it's a pretty similar story here. So again, I'd say Vader is about £15. There have been quite a few Vader sculpts over the years, but this is a pretty nice one. And I think, again, assigning this a value of 15 quid is absolutely fine. Each of the Stormtroopers, they've been released. And again, they're very similar to the Rebel Troopers, I'd say, in terms of value. I think these might have slightly less value just because there's more variety in the Rebel sculpts, and I appreciate that's inherently a sort of slightly odd statement to make when it's Stormtroopers and they should all look quite similar, but with the alien heads and things like that for Rebel Troopers, it maybe does just offer a bit more of an incentive to pick them up, whereas if you've already got loads of Stormtroopers that you spent kind of quite a lot of effort painting, you might not bother picking up these ones as well, so they might lose their value just a little bit quicker. But again, I think entirely reasonable to assign these a value of around 70 quid based on their current retail value. And then Scout Troopers, same as what I said with the Commandos and the Wookiees in the previous one. I'd say you basically get 2 squads of Scout Troopers in here rather than, 1 squad of Commandos and 1 squad of Wookiees like we did in the previous one. And again, I'd say it's roughly fair to say they have a value of about £30. Maybe not quite, again, as much as the previous ones, but for now I think it's entirely reasonable to say they're worth about 30 quid. And then the components, again, same as last time, measuring sticks, movement tools, etc., all probably worth about £40. So again, in terms of value, I think £180 to £185 worth of stuff in this box is a pretty reasonable statement. And again, while this one might drop off a little bit quicker, if you are to pick this up, I think it's highly unlikely that you'll lose loads of money, and £70 to have like an army ready to go in a game as expensive as Legion can end up being is a really good deal. And I think once, especially for newer players, once you get past looking at the starter boxes, you'll start to realise how good a deal they are and why some experienced players are picking them up, even though they've kind of already got their own armies. In terms of the power level, I would say this one is a bit stronger. Vader is really good in Empire right now. Stormtroopers are fine, and while the Scout Troopers aren't amazing, they're fairly decent. So it maybe just is slightly more competitive, and again, a bit more of a competitive grounding perhaps than the Rebel one, but there's not that much in it. And I think both of them, if you were to kind of match off, Rebels versus Empire, I think it would actually be a pretty fun game, and it'd be a pretty close match in most scenarios. For the Empire army list, I got it to 599, couldn't quite get it to 600, which is making my list OCD go a bit nuts. But again, it's the same kind of premise as in the previous one. So you've got Stormtroopers and these Scout strike teams to kind of do some long distance shooting. This one, the Stormtroopers here have got an upgraded heavy weapon, which can fire at quite long range, and the Specialist can give you an aim whenever you need it. Things like that, which is always really useful to increase your damage. And then the Scout strike teams, again, just have those snipers, which can do some really nice and consistent long-range damage. And then for the up-close and personal stuff, I've given the Scout Troopers the Sonic Charge, which is basically like a sort of super grenade that they can run in and kind of punch enemies with, which does some pretty decent damage. So while this isn't, the most competitive, again, grounding for an army, it would be quite fun, and there is some really decent damage output here. And this version of Vader is kind of a bit more on the budget side. I haven't given him like some of the crazy upgrades that you might give him if you're running him sort of in a more competitive sense. But this would give you a reasonable grounding of kind of what Vader's all about, and hopefully you see the power that he possesses. But yeah, this is again a bit more competitive than the Rebel one. But I think if the two were to match up, it would be a pretty close game and definitely worth running. Separatists. Again, £70, so all the boxes are the same. This one does come in slightly cheaper in terms of the value, and I'll explain why in a second. But again, you've got Grievous as the main character. £15 I think is entirely reasonable here. And even though you get more B1s here, so the previous ones, you were only getting 22 Rebel Troopers or 22 Stormtroopers, whereas you get 30 B1 battle droids. You basically get more B1s in a unit typically anyway, so kind of each model is like less valuable, as it were. So you are getting more plastic, and that's definitely something to note. Like, extra sculpts is cool if you like painting them. The flip side is if you don't want to paint them and you find the sort of assembling thing a pain, then there is more work to be done with assembling the B1s. But yeah, 30 sculpts is pretty reasonable. And again, this is just two basic boxes of 15, so you get 115 model box of B1s is normally worth about £30-35. So putting the two together gives you about £70. And I think it is important to reflect here as well that just the core sculpts, so be that the Rebel Troopers, the Stormtroopers, or the B1s, they have kind of the same rough value as the entire box, and you're just getting lots of other stuff kind of for free if you really want to think of it like that. Right? Again, I'm not sure if that's a completely valid way to think of it, but it is a really good deal to get this all kind of bundled together, and it is a really effective way to kind of start off a new army and a new faction. The reason this box is slightly cheaper is just that the droidicas and the B2 battle droids retail for just like £5 or so cheaper than either the Wookiees or the Commandos. So they're probably going to be closer to 25 than 30. So this box does end up being slightly cheaper, around sort of 170 to 175 rather than 180 to 185. But again, you're still getting a lot of value in there, and the droidicas and the B2s are both really competitive units as well. So this would definitely be a really good way to start off if you're looking a bit more of a competitive way. I think the Separatist one is a better grounding maybe for that competitive army list, which is why I've given it a power ranking of A, because I think this and Republic, spoilers, are probably the two most competitive ones. And again, I think in some ways, I don't know if that's an intentional choice, as it were, but like Separatist and Republic, I think would be quite a balanced game. And I think Rebels and Empire would be a fairly balanced game. Whereas I think maybe like Separatists against Rebels, for instance, it might be a bit less balanced. Like, you could definitely still win, and it's not like it would be completely one-sided, but there are more powerful units in the Separatist starter box than I would say there are in the Rebel starter box. Moving over to the Separatist starter army list, this one is pretty legit. Again, I can only get it to 599, which is annoying. There's probably a way to get this to 600, but you know, we move. Basically, I've got loads of B1s in here. So I've got 3 units of B1s, and then I've given the B1 Battle Droid Squad upgrade, which basically puts more B1s in there. So I think this gets to like 20 or 25 B1s or something. Like, it's loads. And then you've got Grievous and the B2s who can do some damage up close. The B2s shoot at much closer range, but they can do some really big damage. Like, they've got some really good output. And Grievous is just a bit of a monster in melee, so that's really nice to have. And then the droidicas kind of do their own thing, run around. They've got some really good consistent damage and are pretty survivable. So yeah, again, this is a really decent like starter way to begin an army list. And I think if you did further down the line want to build into a more competitive army list, you could reuse a lot of this stuff there, because Grievous is pretty valid competitively. I think B2s are pretty valid competitively. B1s are still pretty valid. And droidicas, even though they've been nerfed recently, are still pretty good. So there's definitely like pieces here to start a more competitive army list if that's the kind of thing you're looking for. And the final one is going to be Republic. Again, this one I think is actually probably the best value. I think clones, you tend to get more sort of value per model, as it were. So you actually get a decent number of sculpts in here, and that basically contributes to them being sort of slightly more valuable, I think, overall. But again, you've got your Obi-Wan sculpt, which I'm assigning a value of about £15. It shows the Jedi Guardian over here as a separate one, but that's included in the ARF Trooper squad box. So that's kind of packaged with them. So all of those together, I think, are worth about £35. Again, you've got your two squads of clone troopers. 22 clones is pretty reasonable. Like, you could do quite a lot with that, and most of your armies aren't going to need more than that unless you're doing the sort of super squad thing that some people are doing at the moment. But yeah, I think, again, assigning them a value of about £70 is pretty reasonable here. They might drop over time, but I think they're probably about that is pretty fair. But then also you're getting the new ARF troopers, which have got some really nice sculpts and offer, something a bit different to the Republic Army. They kind of shoot at quite long range. And then the ARC troopers. These are the updated sculpts for the ARC troopers, which are really nice. They're a bit more chunky, a bit more detail on them, which I think is really nice. And while these haven't been like officially released yet, I think it's entirely reasonable to assign them a value of sort of £35 or something, because they are going to be really desirable with people wanting those new sculpts. So these will probably hold their value maybe a little bit better than some of the other ones. And as a result of the ARFs and the ARCs maybe being that bit more valuable, I think you can assign this one like a value of about 190 to maybe 200. So it's probably the most valuable, but you can see they're all pretty close together. And in terms of value, with all of them, you're getting around 185 to 180 pounds of value. And I think, again, for just that £70 sort of input, it is pretty reasonable. And I've given it a power ranking of A because it does have some really competitive units in here. And I think, similar perhaps to the Separatist one, if you were to kind of build into a more competitive Republic army further down the line, this would give you a really solid base to build from in that regard. In terms of the Republic starter army list, I've gone for Obi-Wan with some kits. So he's got burst of speed to help him go quickly, force barrier to help protect his troopers, improv for some order control, and then tenacity, which basically gives you more damage in melee. Then a couple of clone infantry who can help provide you with a bit of defense, and then some long range, some range 3 kind of mid range damage with the Z6, which is basically just like a minigun that fires quite an erratic dice pool, but can occasionally be quite good. Then the ARC troopers are going to run up and they're going to punch stuff, kind of either punch stuff in melee or kind of shoot stuff at quite close range. They can do some really good damage if you use them correctly. And then the ARF troopers will tend to sit that bit further back and kind of plink off some damage at quite long range. They can shoot a bit further than most units, so that's quite nice. And then I've gone for an ARC strike team with a sniper, similar to what I did in the other lists as well. Just nice to have, a sniper running around at the back and for some long range plink damage. But yeah, again, this is a pretty reasonable list, and I think, as I say, if you want to match up against Separatist, it would be a pretty balanced game, and I think it would be pretty even overall. So yeah, that's my kind of overview of the starter boxes currently, kind of what value you're getting, and some example lists for each of them. In terms of the ones for newer players, I think it really depends on which faction you want. Like, I don't think there's enough to pick between them in terms of like value and how competitive they are for that to kind of direct you particularly. I think all of them offer a really valid start to any of the factions, and they're all really reasonable value, as I've kind of shown. They all have quite similar monetary value. So yeah, it is genuinely just kind of which of the factions you prefer. And I have done a video, which I'll link in the description, which kind of describes each of the factions. But yeah, if you are kind of on the fence about starting Legion, my recommendation is look at one of these starter sets, and especially if you can find someone else who's in maybe a similar position to you and is looking to pick up that starter set. I think this, because it comes with an army ready to go in it, if you did just want to face off against somebody else who also bought a starter set, you'll have the same points values. While they're not, exactly balanced against each other, they'll be close enough for you to have a good game. And I think it could be a really positive way to start the hobby. And it will definitely be better value than anything else you pick up further down the line, because I hate to burst that bubble, but it ain't all this cheap. And once you're past this starter set thing, it's going to start to get a bit more expensive if this hobby really gets you. And so do just be prepared for that. But also, you can just stop at a starter set if you want to. There's nothing wrong with just picking this up, having some pickup games with your mates or whatever, and I think that would be really fun. So yeah, if you're on the fence, I would recommend just giving it a go, and you won't lose out that much. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'm not liable for any poor financial decisions you make. So yeah, just bear that in mind. But thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, etc. And I'll see you for the next one.